Meghan Markle has never been a member. I don't know if she's become a member now, but she had been working for Soho House since at least 2005.
Meghan Markle was never supposed to become a symbol, neither of controversy, nor of transformation, nor of the invisible battle between truth and perception.
She didn't buy a membership. She was a working girl for Soho House.
She began like so many others in Hollywood, juggling auditions, reading lines in cramped apartments, hoping the next role would be the one that finally lifted her above the noise.
When she started on Suits and she befriended Jessica Mulrooney, her status changed.
She was one of my Deal or No Deal girls that were, she was a caddy for all of my celebrities.
To her fans, she was the girl who rose from modest beginnings. To critics, she was a woman who climbed too fast. To the world, she was a mystery wrapped in a smile. But to Harry, she became a question he never meant to ask. It started on a quiet evening, long after the lights in Frogmore Cottage had dimmed. Harry scrolled through old blogs, archived photos, forgotten social media posts, curiosity, not suspicion. And in that sea of images, one photograph stood out. Not because of scandal, not because of drama, but because of a detail so small, most people would have missed it. Meghan on a sunlit yacht, a group of friends laughing, the kind of carefree moment everyone has in their 20s. But in the corner, half shadowed, lay a navy blue bag marked with the emblem of Soho House. A place people whispered about more than they described. A place where power met opportunity, where introductions were currency, where stories weren't just lived, they were crafted. Meghan had mentioned Soho House many times, but always casually, like it was little more than a stylish backdrop. Yet the more Harry searched, the more he realized how often it appeared in her past. Guest lists from Toronto, event photos from Madrid, dinners in Istanbul with circles he recognized only from charity boards and high-level meetings. These weren't coincidences, they were constellations waiting to be connected. He didn't blame her, he didn't accuse her, but he couldn't ignore the pattern. Faces he knew from political circles, names tied to global non-profits, individuals who had quietly advised him for years. Yet somehow, many of those same figures had been in Meghan's orbit long before Harry and Meghan ever became a headline. And in the center of those overlaps lived a single name, Marcus Anderson. Harry had met Marcus before, but briefly, just another well-connected figure in London's maze of elites. Marcus had a talent for knowing people before they knew they needed him. He was the kind of man who could place someone in a room without ever appearing in the doorway himself. And when Harry discovered how often Marcus and Meghan's paths had crossed, questions he never planned to ask began forming in the quiet. Meghan never hid her past. She just didn't highlight the parts others found fascinating. Photos appeared showing her at gatherings that seemed far beyond the reach of a mid-tier actress. Moments where she blended effortlessly with financiers, creatives, diplomats, and social players whose influence stretched quietly across continents. Harry wasn't shocked. Meghan was eloquent, charming, open-minded. She could fit into any room with ease. What unsettled him wasn't her presence in those rooms. It was the timing. Every photo, every invitation, every introduction seemed to form a silent trail leading closer and closer to his world. A trail he never realized existed, a trail he didn't know he was walking toward. Suddenly, the blind date didn't feel like a coincidence. Not planned maliciously, not manipulated, just orchestrated in a way he hadn't recognized at the time. A meeting influenced by overlapping networks, whispered suggestions, and people who saw connections before anyone else did. That was when the late-night digging began. Dozens of documents scattered across his desk, old interviews, party lists, paparazzi photos he had ignored years ago, all of them painting a picture he'd never fully seen. Meghan wasn't just a woman who entered his life. She was a woman who had been moving through a world that ultimately intersected with his. And then came the memory, the one he had pushed aside for so long. William's voice, calm but firm. Harry, stories that look perfect usually have chapters you haven't read. Harry had shrugged it off then, convinced his brother simply didn't understand. But now, looking at the patterns, the timing, the connections, he wondered whether William had seen something he missed. Something behind the surface. Something beneath the narrative that the world accepted without question. He began to notice how many familiar faces appeared in Meghan's wedding guest list. People with no connection to her acting past, yet deeply connected to the circles she moved through just before she met him. The narrative of the Hollywood actress marrying the prince suddenly felt too simple, too clean, too perfectly edited. The real story wasn't about manipulation, it was about momentum. A momentum Meghan had been carried by long before she ever shook hands with a royal. And as Harry pieced together the chapters of her life, one realization settled over him. Meghan's rise wasn't accidental, it wasn't magical, it wasn't destiny alone. It was shaped by people who saw potential, shaped by opportunities she accepted, shaped by a world that rewards connections if you know how to use them. The fairy tale didn't crumble, it expanded. It revealed the machinery inside the glitter, the gears that turn behind every public figure, every global love story, every narrative that captures the world's imagination. He didn't love her any less. If anything, he understood her more, but understanding didn't erase the questions. Questions about how much of their story was destiny and how much was design. Questions about who wrote the early chapters, her, the people around her, or a world that had been paving a path longer than either of them knew. And the hardest truth of all, once you see the architecture behind a love story, you can never return to believing it was all coincidence. You don't stop loving, you simply start seeing.